A 72-year-old widower just got laughed out of town for buying a dead stretch of desert for only $25. They called him a fool, said he'd wasted his last dollar. But when he found a dying wild stallion barely breathing in that scorched wasteland, he saw himself in those fading eyes and decided to fight. Nobody believed he could survive. Nobody imagined that cursed land held the greatest miracle of all. Follow this story to the end. Hit like and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this journey has traveled. The August sun hit the Nevada desert like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air into something thick and mean. Elias Crow stood at the edge of what the locals called the Devil's Anvil, 20 acres of black volcanic rock and dust that hadn't seen rain in anyone's memory. He was 72 years old, lean as jerky, with hands that shook just enough to remind him he wasn't what he used to be. Behind him, 3 men from town leaned against a pickup truck, laughing. $25, one of them called out. Hell, Elias, I wouldn't pay 25 cents for that graveyard. Elias didn't turn around. He'd heard worse. The deed was in his pocket, signed that morning at the county office. The clerk had looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. His wife Margaret had been gone 4 months now, and the house they'd rented for 30 years felt like a tomb. The landlord wanted him out by September. $25 was all he had left after the funeral, the hospital bills, the everything. You even got water out here? Another man shouted. This one was Dale Hutchins, who owned the feed store and never missed a chance to remind people. I'll figure it out, Elias said. Figure it out, Dale repeated, like it was the punchline to a joke. Man's gonna die of thirst on his own land. That's poetic, I guess. The third man, younger, just shook his head. Come on, let's go. This is depressing. The truck kicked up dust as it pulled away, and then Elias was alone. Completely alone. The silence out here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the sky was pressing down on him. He walked forward, boots crunching on the brittle ground. The volcanic rock was sharp in places, smooth in others, all of it black as coal and hot enough to burn through thin soles. Nothing grew here, not even weeds. He'd bought it because it was all he could afford, because he needed something, anything, that was his, because dying in a rented room felt worse than dying on land with his name on it. Margaret, he said to the empty air, I hope you're not watching this. His truck was a 1987 Ford that burned oil and made a sound like a sick dog when it started. He'd parked it a quarter-mile back where the dirt road ended. Now he needed to walk the property, see what he'd actually bought. The county map showed a weird triangular plot, narrow on one end and wide on the other, pushed up against BLM land on 2 sides. Worthless. Everyone knew it. The developer who'd owned it before had tried to flip it 5 years ago and couldn't give it away. Elias walked for 20 minutes, sweating through his shirt, until he reached the far western corner where the land sloped down into a shallow basin. That's where he saw it. At first he thought it was a boulder. Then the boulder moved. His heart kicked. He stopped, squinting against the glare. Not a boulder. A horse. A big one. Dark brown, lying on its side in the shade of an outcropping. It wasn't moving much. Just the ribs, rising and falling too slow. Elias moved closer, careful. Wild horses weren't common this far south, but they existed. This one looked like it had been through hell. Coat dull and matted, cuts along the legs, flies buzzing around its face. The horse's eyes were half open, glassy, dying. Easy, Elias said, though he didn't know if the animal could even hear him. He crouched down a few feet away, knees cracking. The horse didn't react. Up close he could see it was a stallion, maybe 4 or 5 years old, built strong but wasted by dehydration and heat. There was dried blood on its shoulder, looked like it had run through barbed wire or something worse. What the hell are you doing out here? Elias whispered. The stallion's eye rolled toward him, just barely. There was no fight left in it, just a dim, fading awareness. Elias sat back on his heels, looking at the animal, and something cracked open in his chest. He'd felt it before, 4 months ago, sitting beside Margaret's hospital bed, watching her slip away inch by inch while the machines beeped and the nurses whispered. That same helpless, useless feeling, that same certainty that nothing he did would matter. He should walk away. The horse was done. Even if he had water, even if he had medicine, it was too far gone. Nature would take it tonight, maybe sooner. The smart thing, the sane thing, was to leave it alone. Elias stood up. He looked at the dying horse. He looked at the empty desert stretching out in every direction. "Damn it," he said. He turned and started walking back toward his truck, moving faster than his knees wanted to go. His canteen was in the cab, half full, maybe 2 cups of water. He grabbed it and headed back. The sun was starting to dip, but it was still brutal. By the time he reached the basin again, his shirt was soaked and his lungs burned. The horse hadn't moved. Elias knelt beside its head and uncapped the canteen. Slowly, carefully, he poured a small stream of water onto the stallion's muzzle. The animal flinched, just slightly. Its tongue moved. Elias waited, then poured a little more, letting it dribble into the corner of the horse's mouth. "Come on," he said. "Come on, don't quit." The horse swallowed. It was a small thing, a reflex, but it was something. Elias used the rest of the canteen, a few drops at a time, until it was empty. Then he sat there in the dirt, watching the horse breathe. The sun dropped lower, shadows stretched across the rocks. "I don't know what I'm doing," Elias said out loud. "I got no water, no feed, no truck that can haul you even if you could stand, and I sure as hell don't know how to save a horse." The stallion's ear twitched. "But I can't just leave you here," Elias continued. "I already left too much behind." He stayed until the light was almost gone, then forced himself to his feet. His back screamed. He needed to get back to the truck before full dark, and he needed a plan. Water. That was the first thing. The town of Ember Creek was 12 miles east. He could fill containers, bring them back tomorrow. It would take all day, but what else was he doing? The walk back to the truck felt twice as long. By the time he reached it, the stars were out, and his legs were shaking. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time before turning the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, caught. The drive into Ember Creek was quiet. The town had one gas station, one diner, one bar, and a general store that closed at 6. Elias pulled up to his rental house, a sagging single-wide at the edge of town, and sat in the dark for a while, staring at nothing. Inside, the place still smelled like Margaret, lavender soap and coffee. He'd stopped cleaning weeks ago. Mail was piled on the counter, most of it stamped red. He ignored it and went to the kitchen, digging out every container he could find. Milk jugs, old detergent bottles, a cooler with a broken handle. He rinsed them out in the sink, working by the light of a single bulb. By midnight, he had 12 jugs lined up on the floor. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was a start. He didn't sleep. At 4 in the morning, he loaded the containers into the truck bed and drove to the gas station. It didn't open until 6, so he waited in the parking lot, drinking bad coffee from a thermos. When the attendant finally unlocked the doors, Elias filled every jug from the outside spigot, paying $2 for the water. The kid working the register looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "You opening a car wash or something?" "Something like that," Elias said. He drove back to the Devil's Anvil as the sun came up, the truck groaning under the weight. The dirt road was rough, and twice he had to stop to tighten the straps holding the jugs down. By the time he parked and started hauling water to the basin, it was already hot. The horse was still alive. Elias didn't know if he was relieved or just surprised. The stallion was in the same position, same spot, but its eyes were open now, watching him. "Yeah, I came back," Elias said, setting down the first jug. "Don't get used to it." He poured water into an old plastic tub he'd brought, setting it near the horse's head. The stallion didn't move. Elias dipped his hand in the water and let it drip onto the animal's nose. This time the horse reacted faster, lifting its head an inch, tongue reaching for the moisture. Elias spent the next hour coaxing the stallion to drink, a little at a time. The horse was weak, but it was trying. That counted for something. "You got a name?" Elias asked. "Probably not." "All right, I'll call you Ridge, on account of you being stubborn as a ridgeline." Ridge's ear flicked. Over the next 3 days, Elias fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, load the truck, drive to the gas station, fill the jugs, drive back, haul water, sit with the horse, repeat. His back hurt, his hands blistered. The kid at the gas station stopped asking questions and started giving him a discount. On the 4th day, Ridge lifted his head on his own and drank straight from the tub. On the 5th day, he tried to stand. He didn't make it, legs folding under him like bad scaffolding, but the effort was there. Elias watched from a few feet away, heart pounding in his chest. "That's it," he said. "That's it, you stubborn bastard." By the end of the first week, Ridge could stand for a few minutes at a time. Elias started bringing feed, cheap alfalfa he bought on credit from Dale Hutchins, who made a comment about throwing good money after bad. Elias didn't argue. He just took the feed and left. The horse was getting stronger, slowly. Not enough to run, not enough to be wild again, but enough to stay alive. Elias started spending entire days out on the land, sleeping in the truck bed, rationing his own water so Ridge could have more. He stopped going into town except for supplies. People noticed. Dale mentioned it to a few folks. Word got around. On the 10th day, a black SUV pulled up to the edge of Elias's property. Elias was sitting in the shade of the outcropping, watching Ridge tear at a pile of hay when he heard the engine. He stood slowly, shading his eyes. The SUV was new, expensive, out of place. It parked where the dirt road ended, and a man stepped out, tall, mid-50s, suit that probably cost more than Elias's truck, sunglasses that reflected the desert back at itself. The man walked toward him with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Elias Crow?" the man called out. "That's me." The man stopped a few feet away, glancing at Ridge, then back at Elias. "Victor Hale. I'm a developer. I've been working on a project in this area, and I wanted to introduce myself." Elias didn't offer his hand. "All right." Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll get to the point. I'm building a luxury resort about 3 miles north of here. High-end, ecotourism, wellness retreats, that sort of thing. Your land is adjacent to my access road. So I'd like to buy it from you." Elias looked at him for a long moment. "It's not for sale." Victor's smile thinned. "I'm offering you $20,000. That's a significant return on a $25 investment." "Not interested." "Mr. Crow, I don't think you understand." "I understand fine," Elias interrupted. "You want my land. I don't want to sell it. That's the end of the conversation." Victor took off his sunglasses, folding them slowly. "You're living in a trailer in Ember Creek. You're broke. This land has no water, no access, no value. I'm offering you a way out. I like the way in just fine." For a moment, Victor just stared at him. Then he put the sunglasses back on and turned to leave. But he stopped after a few steps, looking back over his shoulder. "I tried to be reasonable," Victor said. "Remember that." He walked back to the SUV, got in, and drove away. Elias stood there for a while, watching the dust settle. Ridge walked over, nudging his shoulder with a soft nose. "Yeah," Elias said quietly. "I don't like him either." That night, Elias drove back to town for more water. When he got to the gas station, the spigot was locked. A handwritten sign taped to it read, "Out of order." The attendant, a different kid this time, shrugged when Elias asked, "Manager said it's busted. Dunno when it'll be fixed." Elias tried the diner. They let him fill 2 jugs from the kitchen sink, but the owner made it clear it was a one-time favor. He tried the bar. Same story. By the time he got back to his trailer, he had maybe 6 gallons. Not enough. Not even close. He sat on the steps outside, head in his hands, trying to think. There was a river 20 miles south, but it was on private land, and he didn't have permission. There was a well at the old Hutchins place, but Dale would charge him, and Elias was already in the hole. He thought about Victor Hale's offer. $20,000. Enough to start over somewhere else. Enough to stop fighting. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Ridge, standing on shaking legs, drinking from the tub, trying. "No," Elias said to the empty night. "Not yet." The next morning, he drove to the county office and asked about water rights. The clerk, a tired woman named Patty, pulled up the records for the Devil's Anvil. "No water access," she said. "No wells, no easements. Closest aquifer is 40 feet down, and it's dry." "What about rainwater?" Patty looked at him like he'd suggested catching lightning in a jar. "Mr. Crow, it hasn't rained out there in 3 years." Elias thanked her and left. He drove back to the land, parked the truck, and just sat there. Ridge was lying in the shade, watching him. "I don't know what to do," Elias said. The horse stood up, slowly, carefully, and walked over to the truck. He lowered his head and blew out a long breath, warm and dusty. Elias reached out and touched Ridge's neck. The coat was still rough, but it was getting better. The cuts were healing. The ribs weren't as sharp. "You're not giving up," Elias said. "So I guess I'm not either." He spent the rest of the day hauling the 6 gallons of water he had, stretching it as far as it would go. Ridge drank. Elias drank. The sun set. On the 15th day, Elias's truck wouldn't start. He turned the key 3 times. Nothing. Not even a click. He popped the hood and stared at the engine like it might confess. The battery terminals were corroded, one of the cables loose. He tightened it, tried again. Still nothing. He slammed the hood shut and looked at the sky. "You've got to be kidding me." It was a 6-mile walk to town. He did it in the heat, carrying an empty jug, and by the time he reached the gas station, his vision was blurring. The new attendant let him use the phone. Elias called the one mechanic in Ember Creek, a guy named Roy, who owed him a favor from 10 years back. Roy showed up 2 hours later, took one look at the truck, and shook his head. "Starter's dead. I can get you a new one, but it'll take a week. Maybe 2. "I don't have 2 weeks. "Then I don't know what to tell you, Elias." Roy left. Elias sat on the bumper of his dead truck and tried to figure out what to do. He couldn't haul water without the truck. He couldn't keep Ridge alive without water. And he sure as hell couldn't afford a new starter. He walked back to the basin, where Ridge was standing in the last of the shade, head low. The water tub was empty. "I'm sorry," Elias said. "I don't know how to fix this." Ridge walked over to him, slow and deliberate, and pressed his forehead against Elias's chest. Elias closed his eyes. His hands came up, resting on the horse's neck. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I swear I'm trying." That night, he slept on the ground next to Ridge, staring up at the stars. The desert was cold after dark, and he didn't have a blanket. He didn't care. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Elias thought about Margaret, about the way she used to hum while she cooked, about the way she'd touch his hand when he was angry, just a small squeeze, and it would take the edge off, about the way she'd looked at him the last time, in the hospital, too tired to speak but still trying to smile. "I miss you," he said to the sky. The stars didn't answer. At dawn, he woke to the sound of an engine. He sat up, disoriented, and saw the black SUV parked at the edge of his land again. Victor Hale stepped out, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 men in work clothes climbed out after him. Elias stood, brushing dirt off his pants. Ridge was already on his feet, ears pinned back. Victor walked over, stopping just outside the basin. "Mr. Crow, I heard about your truck. That's unfortunate. What do you want?" "I want to make things easier for you." Victor gestured to the 2 men. "I'm having a road graded through this area next week. Heavy equipment. It's going to get loud, dusty. Your horse won't like it." "This is my land. You can't—" "I can," Victor interrupted. "The county approved my access easement 6 months ago. It runs right through here." He pointed to a line that cut straight through the basin where Ridge stood. Elias felt his chest tighten. "That's a lie. Check with Patty if you want. It's all legal." Victor's smile was thin and cold. "But I'm willing to work with you. Sell me the land and I'll make sure you and your horse are taken care of. I'll even throw in a transport trailer." "Get off my property." Victor didn't move. "You're going to lose, Elias. You've got no water, no money, no way to fight this. I'm giving you a way out. Take it." "No." Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "All right, have it your way." He turned and walked back to the SUV. The 2 men followed. Before he got in, Victor looked back one more time. "Clock's ticking," he said. Then they were gone. Elias stood there, shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Ridge walked over and nudged him hard enough to almost knock him down. "I know," Elias said. "I know." He spent the rest of the day trying to figure out what to do. He walked the property line, looking for the easement markers Victor had mentioned. He found them, metal stakes driven into the ground, marked with orange tape. The line ran right through the heart of the basin. That night, he went back to town and found Patty at the county office, just as she was locking up. "Is it true?" he asked. "The easement?" Patty sighed. "Yeah, it's true. Hale Development filed it months ago. Nobody contested it because nobody owned the land. I own it now." You bought it 2 weeks ago, Elias. The easement was already approved. So what do I do? Patty looked at him with something close to pity. You could try to fight it in court, but that'll cost money you don't have. Or you could sell and move on. Elias didn't answer. He just walked away. Back at the Devil's Anvil, he sat with Ridge and watched the stars come out. The horse leaned against him, warm and solid. I don't know how to beat him, Elias said. I don't even know how to keep you alive past next week. Ridge snorted, shaking his mane. Yeah, Elias said. Yeah, I hear you. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he walked the land, every inch of it, looking for something, anything that might help. Water, an old well. A spring. Anything. He found nothing. As the sun started to rise, he stood at the center of the basin and looked at Ridge, who was watching him with those dark, steady eyes. I'm not done yet, Elias said, and for the first time in months, he believed it. The first bulldozer showed up 3 days later. Elias heard it before he saw it, a low, grinding rumble that made the ground vibrate under his boots. He was sitting with Ridge near the basin, rationing out the last 2 gallons of water he'd managed to scrape together from a neighbor's garden hose. The horse's head jerked up at the sound, ears swiveling. Easy, Elias said, but his own pulse was hammering. The machine came into view over the ridge, yellow and massive, crawling across the desert like something prehistoric. Behind it, Victor Hale's black SUV followed at a distance, kicking up dust. Elias stood slowly, every joint protesting, and walked toward the property line. The bulldozer stopped about 50 feet from the basin. The operator killed the engine and climbed down, a thick-shouldered man in a hard hat who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Victor got out of the SUV, already smiling. Morning, Elias, Victor called out, walking over with his hands in his pockets like they were old friends. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We're starting the grade work today. You're not touching this land, Elias said. Victor tilted his head, still smiling. I'm not touching your land. I'm working the easement, completely legal. You want to call Patty and confirm, be my guest. The bulldozer operator shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Hale, if there's going to be a problem, there's no problem, Victor said smoothly. Mr. Crow understands how this works. Don't you, Elias? Elias felt his hands curl into fists. He was 72 years old, half Victor's size, and hadn't thrown a punch since 1970. But the urge was there, bright and sharp. You do this, you'll ruin the only shade that horse has, Elias said, pointing at the outcropping. That's his water source, his shelter. You run equipment through here, you'll kill him. Victor's smile faded just slightly. Then I suggest you move him. Move him where? He can barely stand for more than an hour. Not my problem. Victor turned to the operator. Get started. The man hesitated, looking between them. Then he climbed back into the bulldozer and fired it up. The engine roared to life, belching black smoke. Elias didn't think. He just moved, stepping directly into the path of the machine, arms spread. The operator saw him and immediately killed the throttle, eyes going wide. Jesus Christ, old man, get out of the way. No, Elias said. Victor walked over and now the smile was completely gone. Elias, you're being ridiculous. Move. Make me. For a long moment they stood there, Elias in front of the bulldozer, Victor a few feet away, the operator watching from the cab like he was witnessing a car wreck. Ridge was pacing behind them, snorting and tossing his head. Victor pulled out his phone. I'm calling the sheriff. Go ahead. Victor made the call. Elias didn't move. The operator turned off the bulldozer and sat there with his arms crossed, clearly done with the whole situation. 20 minutes later, a white pickup with a county seal on the door pulled up, and Sheriff Coleman got out. Coleman was in his mid-60s, overweight, with a mustache that had gone gray years ago. He'd known Elias since high school. He walked over slowly, taking in the scene, and sighed like a man who'd seen this movie before. Elias, Coleman said, what are you doing? Standing on my land. You're blocking a legal easement. I'm standing on my land, Elias repeated. Coleman rubbed his face. Victor, give us a minute. Victor looked annoyed but walked back to his SUV. Coleman stepped closer, lowering his voice. Elias, I know you've had a rough year. I know what you're going through. But you can't do this. The easement's legal. You don't have a case. He's trying to kill my horse. He's building a road. Same thing. Coleman looked at Ridge, then back at Elias. Look, if you need help moving the horse, I can make some calls. There's a rescue out in Reno that might... I'm not giving him up. Then what's the plan here? You going to stand in front of a bulldozer until you drop dead? Elias didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Coleman sighed again, deeper this time. I don't want to arrest you, but if you don't move, I have to. Then arrest me. Elias, I'm not moving, Tom. Coleman stared at him for a long time. Then he turned and walked back to Victor, who was leaning against his SUV with his arms crossed. They talked in low voices, too quiet for Elias to hear. Finally, Victor threw up his hands and got back in the SUV. The bulldozer operator followed suit, climbing into his own truck. Coleman walked back to Elias. You got 24 hours. After that, I'm coming back with a court order, and you'll go to jail if you pull this stunt again. Use the time to figure something out. He left. The machines left, and Elias stood there in the dust, shaking so hard he had to sit down. Ridge walked over and lowered his head, resting it on Elias's shoulder. I bought us a day, Elias said. That's all I got. That night, he drove into Ember Creek and knocked on doors. First stop was Dale Hutchins, who answered in a bathrobe and looked at Elias like he'd brought the plague. I need help, Elias said. Dale snorted. Join the club. I need to move a horse, just temporarily, somewhere safe for a few days while I figure things out. And what do I get out of it? I'll pay you back. With what? You're broke, Elias. Everyone knows it. I'll work it off. I can still swing a hammer. You're 72 years old, Dale interrupted. You can't do anything I can't hire a teenager to do for minimum wage. Answer's no. He shut the door. Elias tried 3 more houses. Same result. People were polite mostly, but the answer was always no. By midnight, he was out of options and out of energy. He drove back to the Devil's Anvil and slept in the truck bed, staring at the stars. The next morning, Ridge wouldn't eat. Elias had brought a fresh bale of hay, but the horse just looked at it and turned away. He was standing, but barely, legs trembling, head low. The heat was already climbing, and they were down to less than a gallon of water. Come on, Elias said, holding out a handful of hay. You gotta eat. Ridge didn't move. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. The horse was giving up. He could see it in the way Ridge stood, the way his eyes had gone dull. The fight was draining out of him, same way it had drained out of Margaret in those final weeks. No, Elias said. No, you don't get to quit. Not now. He poured the last of the water into the tub, but Ridge didn't drink. Elias knelt beside him, running a hand down the horse's neck. The coat was rough, the ribs too sharp. All the progress they'd made was slipping away. I'm sorry, Elias whispered. I'm so sorry. At noon, the bulldozer came back. This time, there were 2 of them, along with a grader and a water truck. Victor's SUV pulled up behind them, and Sheriff Coleman's pickup wasn't far behind. Coleman got out, holding a piece of paper. Court order, he said, handing it to Elias. Easement work is authorized to proceed. You interfere, you go to jail. That's it. Elias looked at the paper. The words blurred together. How long do I have? They're starting now. The machines fired up, and the noise was deafening. Ridge bolted, or tried to. His legs folded under him, and he went down hard, thrashing in the dirt. Elias ran to him, dropping to his knees. Whoa, easy, Elias shouted over the noise, hands on Ridge's neck. The horse was panicking, eyes rolling, breath coming in sharp gasps. The bulldozers moved closer, engines roaring. Dust billowed up, thick and choking. Ridge tried to stand again, failed, and Elias felt something break inside him. Stop, he screamed, turning toward the machines. Stop! You're killing him! Nobody heard him. Or if they did, they didn't care. The bulldozers kept coming, blades digging into the earth, tearing up the ground in long, brutal furrows. The noise was unbearable. Ridge was still thrashing, and Elias couldn't calm him down, couldn't do anything except hold on and watch it all fall apart. Then Victor was there, standing a few feet away, watching. This didn't have to happen, Victor said, loud enough to be heard over the machines. You could have taken the money and walked away. Elias looked up at him, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to genuinely hate someone. Get out, Elias said. Victor shrugged. It's a free country. He walked away. The bulldozers kept working. Ridge finally stopped thrashing and just lay there, sides heaving, covered in dust. Elias sat beside him, one hand on the horse's neck, and watched the land get torn apart. By the time the machine stopped, 3 hours later, the basin was unrecognizable. The outcropping was still there, but the ground around it had been leveled and graded, scraped down to bedrock in places. The shade was gone. The shelter was gone. What was left looked like a construction site. The machines pulled out, leaving deep ruts and a haze of dust that hung in the air like a curse. Coleman walked over, looking tired. "I'm sorry, Elias," he said. Elias didn't answer. He just sat there with Ridge, waiting for the dust to settle. When the sun started to go down, he finally stood. His legs barely held him. Ridge was still on the ground, breathing but not moving. Elias walked to the truck, pulled out a tarp, and spread it over the horse to block the worst of the wind. Then he sat down again and leaned against Ridge's side. "I don't know what to do," he said quietly. "I don't know how to fix this." Ridge's ear twitched, the only sign he was listening. Elias closed his eyes. He thought about calling it quits. Thought about accepting that some things couldn't be saved, no matter how hard you fought. Thought about Margaret and the way she'd let go at the end, peaceful and ready. But when he opened his eyes, Ridge was looking at him, not the dull, empty stare from earlier. Something sharper, something that hadn't given up yet. "All right," Elias said. "All right, we'll try." He spent the next day trying to scavenge water from every source he could think of. He drove to a creek 15 miles south, only to find it had dried up. He tried a cattle ranch on the edge of town, but the foreman ran him off. He even went back to the gas station, where the spigot was still locked and the attendant told him to stop asking. By the time he got back to the Devil's Anvil, it was almost dark and he had nothing. Ridge was standing, barely near the remains of the outcropping. Elias gave him the last cup of water from his own canteen and watched the horse drink it in 3 swallows. "That's it," Elias said. "That's all I got." Ridge nudged him, hard enough to make him stumble. "I know," Elias said. "I know you need more. I just don't have it." He sat down in the dirt, back against a rock, and tried to think. The resort was 3 miles north. Victor had mentioned something about water infrastructure. If they were building a luxury resort in the desert, they had to have a water source. A well, maybe. Or a pipeline. Elias stood up, ignoring the way his knees screamed, and started walking north. Ridge followed, moving slow but determined. They walked for over an hour, across open desert, until they saw lights in the distance. The construction site was massive. Bulldozers, trailers, stacks of lumber, concrete mixers. And in the center of it all, a drilling rig. Elias could see the setup from a quarter-mile away, lit up by floodlights. They were drilling a well. He got closer, staying low, until he could see the crew. 4 men, working late, guiding the drill bit deeper into the ground. There was a water truck parked nearby, filled to the brim. Elias looked at Ridge. The horse looked back. "This is a bad idea," Elias said. Ridge snorted. Elias waited until the crew took a break, heading into one of the trailers. Then he moved fast, circling around to the water truck. The spigot was locked, but the cap on the tank itself wasn't. He climbed up, unscrewed it, and lowered a hose he'd brought from his truck. It took 10 minutes to fill the jugs he'd carried. His heart was hammering the whole time, expecting someone to shout, to come running. But nobody did. The crew was inside, probably eating dinner or cooling off. He screwed the cap back on, climbed down, and loaded the jugs onto Ridge's back using a makeshift harness he'd rigged from rope and canvas. The horse stood still, patient, like he understood. They made it halfway back before the headlights found them. Elias turned, shielding his eyes, and saw Victor's SUV coming fast across the open desert. It stopped 20 feet away, and Victor got out, flanked by 2 security guards. "You've got to be kidding me," Victor said, looking at Elias and the water jugs. "You're stealing from me now?" "I'm borrowing," Elias said. "That's not how it works." Victor gestured to the guards. "Take the water, and if you see him on this site again, call the cops." The guards moved forward. Ridge stepped between them and Elias, ears pinned flat, teeth bared. One of the guards stopped, hand going to his belt. "Don't," Elias said quickly. "Don't you touch that horse." "Then get him under control," the guard said. "He is under control. You're just in his space." Victor walked closer, and his expression was colder than Elias had ever seen it. "You're done, Elias," You hear me? You're out of moves, out of options. Sell me the land or I'll make sure you lose everything. I already lost everything, Elias said. You're just late to the party. Victor stared at him. Then he turned to the guards. Take the water. Let him go. The guards moved in and Ridge lunged. He didn't bite, didn't strike, just lunged. And it was enough. The guards backed off, hands up. Victor swore under his breath. Fine, Victor said. Keep the damn water. But if I catch you here again, I'll have you arrested, and I'll make sure that horse ends up at a glue factory. He got back in the SUV and drove off, the guards following. Elias stood there, shaking, until the headlights disappeared over the ridge. Ridge nudged him. Yeah, Elias said. Let's go home. They made it back to the Devil's Anvil just before midnight. Elias unloaded the water, gave Ridge as much as he could drink, and collapsed in the dirt. Every muscle in his body hurt. His head pounded. But Ridge was drinking, and that was enough. The next morning, Elias woke to the sound of his truck's engine turning over. He sat up, disoriented, and saw a man standing by the driver's door. Roy, the mechanic. What are you doing? Elias called out, stumbling to his feet. Roy stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. Heard you were having trouble, figured I'd take a look. I can't pay you. I know. Roy gestured to the truck. Starter was dead, like I said, but I had an old one lying around from a salvage job. Close enough match, it'll run. Elias stared at him. Why? Roy shrugged. Margaret used to bring me pie every Thanksgiving. Pumpkin. Best I ever had. Figured I owed her one. He got in his own truck and drove off before Elias could say anything else. Elias stood there for a long moment, looking at his truck. Then he turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. Ridge walked over, and Elias rested a hand on the horse's neck. We got wheels, he said. That's something. Over the next week, Elias fell into a new rhythm. He'd drive to the construction site at night, wait for the crew to leave, and siphon water from the tank. It wasn't legal. It probably wasn't smart. But it kept Ridge alive. Victor's security got tighter. They started locking the water truck, then parking it inside a fenced area. Elias adapted, finding gaps in the fence, learning the guards' schedules. It became a game, dangerous, exhausting, but a game he was winning, until the night he got caught. He was halfway through filling a jug when the lights came on, bright and blinding. Two guards grabbed him before he could run, hauling him to his feet. Victor walked out of the shadows, arms crossed. I warned you, Victor said. Go ahead, Elias said. Call the cops, throw me in jail. I'll be out in a day and I'll come right back. Victor smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm not calling the cops. He nodded to the guards, and one of them pulled a phone from his pocket, showing Elias the screen. It was a photo, Ridge, standing alone near the outcropping. Animal Control's been looking for that horse, Victor said. Wild stallion on private land, no ownership papers, probable health risk. I make one call, they'll come pick him up tomorrow. And you know what happens to unclaimed horses at County Impound? Elias felt his blood turn to ice. They auction them off, Victor continued. And if nobody bids, well, there's always the slaughterhouse. So here's the deal. You sell me the land tonight, and I forget I ever saw that horse. You don't, and he's gone by noon tomorrow. Elias looked at the photo. At Ridge, alone and vulnerable. You're a bastard, Elias said quietly. I'm a businessman. Victor pulled a contract from his jacket pocket, already filled out. $20,000. Sign it, and we're done. Elias took the contract. His hands were shaking. He looked at the number, 20,000, and thought about what it could buy. A new start. A place with water. Maybe even a way to keep Ridge. But he thought about the way Ridge had fought to stand. The way the horse had nudged him when he was ready to quit. The way they'd survived together, day after day, when everyone said it was impossible. He tore the contract in half. Victor's expression didn't change. Wrong choice. Probably, Elias said, but it's mine. The guard shoved him toward his truck. He got in, started the engine, and drove back to the Devil's Anvil with his heart pounding so hard he thought it might give out. Ridge was waiting for him, standing in the moonlight. Elias got out of the truck and walked over, resting his forehead against the horse's neck. They're coming for you tomorrow, he said. I don't know how to stop them. Ridge stood still, solid and warm. Elias stayed there until the sun started to rise, trying to think of a plan. But every path he could see led to the same place: losing Ridge, losing the land, losing everything. By mid-morning, a white van with county animal control printed on the side pulled up to the edge of the property. 2 officers got out along with Victor, who stood back with his arms crossed like he was watching a show. "We got a report of an unclaimed wild horse," one of the officers said, holding a clipboard. "You the owner?" "Yeah," Elias said. "You got papers? Registration?" "No," the officer sighed. "Then I'm sorry, sir, but we have to take the animal into custody. County ordinance." Ridge was standing near the remains of the outcropping, watching them. Elias stepped between the horse and the officers. "He's not going anywhere," Elias said. "Sir, we don't want to make this difficult." "Then don't." The second officer, younger, pulled out a tranquilizer gun. "Step aside, sir. We're authorized to use sedation if necessary." Elias felt the world tilt. He looked at Victor, who was smiling now. "Last chance," Victor said. "Sign the paper, and they leave." Elias turned back to Ridge. The horse was watching him, ears forward, waiting, and then Ridge did something Elias didn't expect. The horse turned and walked away, not running, not panicking, just walking with slow, deliberate steps toward the far side of the basin. He stopped at a spot near the western edge, where the volcanic rock was cracked and uneven, and started pawing at the ground. "What's he doing?" one of the officers asked. Elias didn't answer. He was watching Ridge, who was striking the same spot over and over, hooves ringing against the stone. The horse's ears were pinned back, his whole body tense. "He's just spooked," Victor said. "Get him loaded." But Elias was already moving, walking toward Ridge. The horse looked at him, then pawed the ground again, harder this time, almost frantic. Elias knelt down, running his hands over the cracked rock. It felt different here, cooler. And when he pressed his ear to the ground, he thought he heard something, a faint rumble deep below. "Ridge," he said quietly. "What are you trying to tell me?" The horse struck the ground one more time, and a piece of the rock broke away. Underneath, the stone was darker, almost wet. Elias stood up, his heart pounding. "I need a crowbar," he said. Nobody moved for a second. Then Victor laughed, sharp and dismissive. "A crowbar? What are you going to do, dig for buried treasure?" Elias ignored him. He was already running toward his truck, boots slipping on the loose rock. His toolbox was in the bed, rusted shut from years of neglect. He yanked it open, grabbed the crowbar, and ran back. Ridge was still there, pawing at the same spot, breath coming hard through his nostrils. The animal control officers had stopped advancing, watching with confused expressions. Victor's smile had faded into something irritated. "Sir, we need to proceed with—" one of the officers started. "Just give me a minute," Elias said, dropping to his knees. He wedged the crowbar into the crack Ridge had opened and pushed down. Nothing happened. He tried again, putting his full weight on it, and felt something shift. A piece of volcanic rock the size of a dinner plate broke loose, tumbling away. Underneath, the stone was dark and wet. Elias pressed his hand against it. Cool water seeped between his fingers. "There's water," he said, barely breathing the words. "What?" The younger officer stepped closer. Elias jammed the crowbar deeper into the crack, levering up another chunk of rock. More water. Not much, just a trickle, but it was there, pooling in the depression, reflecting the harsh desert sun. Victor walked over, his expression unreadable. "That's groundwater seepage. Could be from anywhere. Doesn't mean anything." But Elias wasn't listening. He could feel it now, a faint vibration under his palm, like a pulse. Ridge was standing right beside him, nostrils flared, eyes locked on the ground. "Get back," Elias said to everyone. Just get back." He drove the crowbar in as deep as it would go, angling it toward the vibration. The metal scraped against stone, then suddenly dropped, sinking 6 inches into open space. Elias pulled it out and looked into the hole. Darkness. And the sound of moving water. "There's a cavity down there," he said. "Something hollow." Victor's face had gone tight. "This is absurd. You're wasting everyone's time." "Then why are you still here?" Elias shot back. He picked up a rock and dropped it into the hole. It fell for a long second before hitting water with a distant splash that echoed up from below. The rumbling got louder. Ridge backed up, snorting. The animal control officers looked at each other, then started moving toward their van. Even Victor took a step back. "What is that?" the younger officer said. Elias didn't answer. He was staring at the crack, which was widening, not fast, but steady, like something underneath was waking up. The ground trembled. Dust rose in small puffs around the edges of the break. "Everyone off the property," Victor said suddenly. "Now." "This is my land," Elias said. "I don't care. If this is some kind of sinkhole." The ground dropped. Not collapsed. Dropped. A section of volcanic rock the size of a kitchen table just fell away, disappearing into the darkness below. The hole it left behind was maybe 4 feet across, jagged-edged, and from inside came the sound of rushing water. Elias scrambled back as more rock broke away, widening the opening. Ridge was already 20 feet back, ears flat against his skull. The animal control officers were running for their van. Victor stood frozen, staring at the hole. Then the pressure hit. It came all at once. A column of water that exploded out of the ground like a cannon shot, spraying 15 feet into the air before falling back in a frothing torrent. The noise was deafening, a roar that drowned out everything else. Water poured out of the opening, spreading across the basin in a shallow flood that turned the dust to mud in seconds. Elias fell backward, soaked instantly, trying to process what he was seeing. Ridge was dancing in place, alternating between fear and something that looked almost like excitement. The geyser kept coming, relentless, sending up a mist that caught the sunlight and turned it into rainbows. Victor was shouting something, but Elias couldn't hear him over the water. The developer was backing toward his SUV, shoes squelching in the mud, face pale. The animal control officers were already in their van, pulling away fast. The white vehicle fishtailed in the wet dirt before finding traction and disappearing down the access road. And still the water came. Elias got to his feet, unsteady, staring at the geyser. It wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was getting stronger. The column of water now reaching 20 feet, maybe more, pulsing with a rhythm that felt alive. The basin was flooding, water pooling in every low spot, carving new channels through the volcanic rock. Ridge walked toward him, splashing through ankle-deep water, and pressed his nose against Elias's chest. "You knew," Elias said, running a hand down the horse's wet neck. "You son of a bitch! You knew it was there!" Victor had reached his SUV but hadn't gotten in. He was standing beside it, phone pressed to his ear, staring at the water like it was a hallucination. Elias walked toward him, each step sending up small splashes. "You need to leave," Elias said. Victor lowered the phone. His carefully maintained composure was cracking at the edges. "What the hell did you just do?" "I didn't do anything. Ridge did." "That's—" Victor gestured at the geyser, at a loss. "That's not possible. We surveyed this entire area. There's no aquifer here, no water table, nothing." "Guess you missed something." Victor's jaw tightened. "You realize this changes nothing. You still have no infrastructure, no way to contain it. That water's going to drain away or evaporate, and you'll be right back where you started." "Maybe," Elias said, "but it's my water, on my land, and you're trespassing." For a moment, Victor looked like he might argue. Then he got in the SUV, slammed the door, and drove off without another word. Elias stood there for a long time, watching the water spray into the desert air. Ridge stayed beside him, solid and calm now, like the panic had burned itself out. The geyser was already starting to settle, not stopping, but finding a rhythm. The initial explosion had given way to a steady flow, still powerful, but no longer violent. By the time the sun started dropping toward the horizon, the basin had transformed. What had been dry rock and dust was now a shallow lake, maybe an acre across, fed by the spring. The water was cold and clear, tasting faintly mineral when Elias cupped some in his hands. Ridge was already drinking, head lowered, taking long pulls. Elias sat down on a dry rock at the edge of the new lake and tried to wrap his head around what had just happened. A week ago, this land had been a graveyard. Now it was alive. The desert hadn't changed, the heat was still brutal, the sky still empty. But this one spot, this little piece of hell, had turned into something else. He pulled out his phone, a flip model from 2008 that barely held a charge, and called Patty at the county office. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding harried. "Patty, it's Elias Crow." "Elias, I'm about to leave for the day. I need to file a water rights claim." There was a pause. What? I found a spring. On my land, a big one. I need to know what I have to do to claim it. Another pause, longer this time. You're serious. Dead serious. Elias, natural springs in Nevada fall under prior appropriation law. If you're the first to beneficially use the water and you file the proper claim, it's yours. But you need to prove continuous flow and beneficial use. That means documentation, surveys, the whole deal. How long does that take? Weeks, maybe months, and that's assuming nobody contests it. Elias looked at the lake, at Ridge drinking his fill. Someone's going to contest it. Then you'll need a lawyer, a good one. I can't afford a lawyer, Patty sighed. Then you'd better figure something out, because Victor Hale's not going to let this go. If there's water on your land, and his resort depends on the aquifer. She trailed off, but Elias could hear the worry in her voice. What are you saying? I'm saying you might have just stepped into the biggest fight of your life. Elias thanked her and hung up. Ridge had finished drinking and was now standing in the shallow water, looking more alive than Elias had seen him in weeks. The cuts on his legs were still visible, but the dullness in his eyes was gone. He looked like a wild horse again, strong, unbroken. We did it, Elias said. We actually did it. Ridge shook his mane, sending water droplets flying. That night, Elias slept on the ground beside the lake, too exhausted to drive back to town. He used the tarp from his truck as a blanket and Ridge as a windbreak. The temperature dropped hard after sunset, like it always did in the desert, but the water seemed to hold some warmth, or maybe he was just too tired to care. He woke to the sound of engines. The sky was barely light, the sun not yet cresting the horizon. Elias sat up, disoriented, and saw headlights coming across the desert, multiple vehicles moving fast. His heart kicked into high gear. He stood, his back screaming in protest, and Ridge was already on his feet, ears swiveling. The vehicles stopped at the edge of the property. 4 of them. 2 were county trucks. 1 was Victor's SUV. The last was a white sedan Elias didn't recognize. People got out. Victor, Sheriff Coleman, a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase, 2 men in work clothes with surveying equipment, and someone else, a man in his 40s wearing jeans and a polo shirt, holding a clipboard. Coleman walked over first, his expression grim. Elias, we need to talk. About what? The woman in the suit stepped forward. Mr. Crow, my name is Angela Faust. I'm an attorney representing Hale Development. We're here to conduct an emergency survey of the water source on this property. You can't do that without my permission. Actually, we can. She pulled a document from her briefcase and handed it to him. This is a court order authorizing a geological survey under Nevada revised statutes. Chapter 534. Water resources in this state are subject to public interest regulations, and any new source must be evaluated for impact on existing claims. Elias looked at the paper. The legal language blurred together, but the signature at the bottom was real. A judge had signed it last night. You got a court order in 12 hours, Elias said. Mr. Hale is a persuasive man, Angela said smoothly, and this is a matter of significant public concern. His resort employs over 200 people. If your spring is connected to the aquifer his project depends on, it could jeopardize the entire operation. That's not my problem. It's everyone's problem, Mr. Crow. Now you can cooperate and let the surveyors do their job, or we can have the sheriff escort you off the property while they work. Your choice. Elias looked at Coleman, who wouldn't meet his eyes. I'm sorry, Elias, Coleman said quietly. It's a legal order. The surveyors were already setting up equipment near the spring, unloading instruments from the trucks. The man with the clipboard, a hydrologist, Elias guessed, was taking water samples, lowering a small vial into the lake. This is bullshit, Elias said. Language, Mr. Crow, Angela said with a thin smile. Victor had stayed near his SUV, arms crossed, watching. Elias walked toward him, ignoring the lawyer's protest. Ridge followed, close enough that his shoulder brushed Elias's arm. You really can't stand to lose, can you? Elias said. Victor's expression was cold. This isn't about losing. It's about protecting an investment. That spring of yours? If it's pulling from the same aquifer I'm using, you could drain my well dry. I've got $40 million sunk into this project. I'm not letting some old man with a death wish ruin it. You don't own the water under the ground. Neither do you. Not yet. And if my hydrologist finds what I think he's going to find, you never will. The hydrologist in question was now conferring with the surveyors, pointing at a handheld device that was beeping steadily. They spent the next 3 hours taking measurements, drilling test holes, running calculations. Elias sat on a rock and watched, feeling helpless. Ridge grazed nearby, unconcerned. Finally, the hydrologist walked over to Angela and Victor, showing them something on his clipboard. They talked in low voices, too quiet for Elias to hear. Then Angela walked over to Elias, her expression carefully neutral. Preliminary findings suggest the spring is fed by a confined aquifer approximately 60 feet below the surface, she said. It appears to be hydrologically connected to the regional water table, which includes the aquifer serving Mr. Hale's project. English, Elias said. Your spring and his well are drinking from the same source. If you continue to use the water, it could impact his supply. And if he continues to use the water, it could impact mine. Angela's smile was razor thin. Mr. Hale filed his water rights claim 3 years ago. It's already approved and legally binding. You filed yours, when? Yesterday? You're junior, which means in any dispute over allocation, his claim takes priority. Elias felt the ground shift under him. That's not... It's the law, Mr. Crow. Prior appropriation. First in time, first in right. You're last in line. Victor walked over, hands in his pockets. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to cap that spring. We'll provide the materials and the labor. Once it's sealed, we can all move on. And if I don't? Then I'll file an injunction to stop you from using the water, and I'll win. You know I will. Elias looked at Ridge, who was standing in the shallow lake, drinking. Then he looked at Victor. No, he said. Victor's expression hardened. Excuse me? You heard me. No, I'm not capping it. This is my land, my water. You want it sealed, you'll have to do it yourself. Then I'll get another court order, and this time the sheriff won't be asking nicely. Coleman, who'd been standing off to the side, shifted uncomfortably. Victor, maybe we can... Stay out of this, Tom, Victor snapped. Then to Elias. You've got 48 hours. After that, I'm filing the injunction, and when I do, you'll lose everything. He walked back to his SUV. Angela followed, the surveyors packed up their equipment, and within 10 minutes, the caravan was gone. Elias stood there in the silence, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. Ridge walked over and nudged him, leaving a wet smear on his shirt. I don't know how to fight this, Elias said. Ridge just looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. Elias spent the rest of the day trying to figure out his next move. He drove into town and stopped at the library, using their ancient computer to research water rights law. The more he read, the worse it got. Victor was right. Prior appropriation meant first claim won, and Victor's claim predated Elias's by years. He tried calling lawyers. 3 hung up when they heard who he was up against. 2 quoted retainer fees he couldn't afford. 1 laughed and told him to save his money. By evening, he was back at the Devil's Anvil, sitting beside the spring, watching the water flow. It had settled into a steady rhythm now, not the explosive geyser from before, but a strong, constant stream that kept the lake full. Ridge was lying nearby, finally resting after days of struggle. Elias picked up a stone and threw it into the water, watching the ripples spread. I can't beat him in court, he said out loud. I can't afford to fight, and even if I could, the law's on his side. Ridge's ear twitched. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let him take this from you. He stood up, his mind racing. If he couldn't win legally, he needed another angle. Something Victor wouldn't expect. He thought about the resort, about the water infrastructure Victor had mentioned. The developer had said the project depended on the aquifer. If Elias's spring was connected to it, an idea started forming. Risky. Probably stupid. But it was all he had. He drove back to town and found Roy at his shop, closing up for the night. I need a favor, Elias said. Roy looked at him warily. What kind of favor? The kind where you don't ask questions, Roy sighed. This going to get me arrested? Probably not. That's not reassuring, Elias. I need you to find out where Victor Hale's water line runs, the main pipe feeding his resort. I need to know the route, the depth, everything. Roy stared at him. Why? Because I think it's on my land. And if it is, Then he's trespassing, and I've got leverage. Roy rubbed his face. This is a terrible idea. You got a better one? Yeah, take the money and leave. Can't do that. Roy looked at him for a long moment, then sighed again. I'll make some calls. No promises. 2 days later, Roy showed up at the Devil's Anvil with a rolled-up blueprint and a guilty expression. County records, Roy said, spreading the blueprint on the hood of Elias's truck. Hale Development filed for a utility easement 2 years ago. Water main runs from his well site to the resort construction area. He traced a line on the blueprint with his finger. It cut across open desert, skirted BLM land, and then, right at the edge, crossed through the narrow western corner of Elias's property. Son of a bitch, Elias breathed. He's probably got an easement for it, Roy said quickly. Legal permission to run the pipe. Did he file for one? Roy hesitated. I couldn't find any record of it. Elias looked at the blueprint, then at Roy. You sure? I checked 3 times. There's an easement application, but it was never approved. Looks like it got stuck in bureaucratic limbo, and nobody followed up. Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but something close. That means the pipe's on my land without permission. Technically, yeah. But Elias, you go after him for this. He's going to come at you with everything he's got. Lawyers, countersuits, the whole arsenal. Let him, Roy shook his head. You're going to get yourself killed. I'm 72, I'm already halfway there. Roy rolled up the blueprint and handed it to Elias. Your funeral, old man. Elias drove straight to the county office and found Patty still at her desk, buried in paperwork. He laid the blueprint in front of her. I need to file a trespassing complaint, he said. Patty looked at the blueprint, then at him. Against Hale Development? Yes. Elias, do you have any idea? I know exactly what I'm doing. Patty pulled the blueprint closer, studying it. Her expression shifted from skeptical to surprised. He never got approval for this. I know. That means the pipeline's illegal. I know. Patty sat back, staring at him. You realize he's going to fight this. He'll claim it was an administrative oversight, get retroactive approval, tie it up in appeals for years. Maybe. But in the meantime, I've got a legal complaint on file, which means if he tries to shut down my spring, I can point to his pipeline and say he's doing the exact same thing, trespassing on my land without permission. A slow smile spread across Patty's face. You sneaky old bastard. I learned from the best. She pulled out a form and started filling it out. This is going to make you very unpopular. I was never popular to begin with. The complaint was filed that afternoon. By the next morning, Victor's lawyer was on the phone with Patty, demanding a meeting. By noon, the injunction Victor had threatened to file was quietly withdrawn. Elias got the call from Patty just after lunch. He backed off, she said, sounding almost amused. No injunction, no legal action. He's pulling back. Why? Because if he goes after your spring while his pipeline's sitting on your land illegally, it makes him look like a hypocrite. And more importantly, it gives you grounds to countersue. He's not stupid. He knows when to fold. Elias sat down heavily on the bumper of his truck, the phone pressed to his ear. So what happens now? Now? You both sit on your respective claims and hope the other guy blinks first, or you negotiate. Come to some kind of agreement. I'm not giving up the spring. Then you'd better hope he doesn't find another way to get what he wants. Elias hung up and walked back to the lake. Ridge was standing in the water, head lowered, drinking. The spring was still flowing, steady, and strong. For the first time in weeks, Elias let himself believe it might actually be over. He was wrong. 3 days later, Victor showed up at the Devil's Anvil in person. No lawyer, no entourage. Just him, stepping out of his SUV with his hands empty and his expression unreadable. Elias was sitting on a rock, watching Ridge graze, when Victor walked over. We need to talk, Victor said. I got nothing to say to you. Then listen. Victor sat down on a nearby rock, uninvited. I underestimated you. I thought you were just some broke old man trying to die with dignity. I didn't realize you had teeth. What do you want, Victor? I want to make a deal. Elias looked at him. I already turned down your money. I'm not offering money. Victor gestured at the spring, at the lake. You've got water. I need water. And like it or not, we're both pulling from the same source. We can keep fighting, drain our bank accounts on lawyers, and end up with nothing. Or we can work together. Work together how? You let me tap into your spring. Not much. Just enough to supplement my well during peak season. In exchange, I'll drop the easement claim on your land and pay for a proper infrastructure setup. Pipes, storage tanks, filtration. Everything you need to actually use the water long term. Elias studied him. And what's the catch? The catch is you sign a binding agreement that limits how much water you can draw. We set quotas. You stay under your limit, I stay under mine, and the aquifer stays healthy. So you get to control how much water I use on my own land. We both control it. That's how this works. Otherwise, one of us drains it dry and we both lose. Elias was quiet for a long time, watching Ridge. The horse had wandered closer, ears forward, listening. I need to think about it, Elias said. Victor stood up, brushing dust off his pants. You've got 72 hours. After that, the offer's off the table, and we go back to war. He walked back to his SUV and drove away. Elias sat there until the sun set, turning Victor's offer over in his mind. It made sense, in a cold, pragmatic way. It would solve the legal mess, give him the infrastructure he needed, and guarantee long-term access to the water. But it also meant trusting Victor, and Elias didn't trust him as far as he could throw him. Ridge walked over and lowered his head, resting it on Elias's shoulder. What do you think? Elias asked. The horse just breathed warm and steady. Elias closed his eyes. He thought about Margaret, about the way she'd always told him to pick his battles. Not every fight was worth winning. Sometimes survival was enough. But then he thought about the way Victor had tried to crush him, tried to take Ridge, tried to destroy the only thing Elias had left. And he knew what his answer would be. Elias showed up at Victor's office 3 days later, just before the deadline expired. The building was new construction on the edge of Ember Creek, all glass and steel that looked like it had been airlifted in from somewhere that mattered. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect teeth, looked startled when Elias walked in, boots tracking dust across the polished floor. I'm here to see Victor Hale, Elias said. Do you have an appointment? He's expecting me. She made a call and 2 minutes later Victor appeared, looking surprised. Elias, I didn't think you'd come. We need to talk, Elias said. Somewhere private. Victor led him to a conference room with windows overlooking the desert. There was coffee in a carafe that probably cost more than Elias's truck. Victor poured 2 cups without asking. So, Victor said, sitting down, you ready to accept my offer? Elias didn't touch the coffee. I did some digging, talked to a hydrologist out of Reno, independent guy, no connection to either of us. Victor's expression shifted slightly. And he told me something interesting. That aquifer you're so worried about, it's not a single source, it's a network. Multiple chambers connected by fissures in the volcanic rock. Which means my spring and your well aren't just connected, they're part of the same system. I already know that, but here's the part you don't know. Or maybe you do, and you're just hoping I'm too stupid to figure it out. Elias leaned forward. Your well is downstream, geologically speaking. The water flows from my spring toward your well site, which means if I shut down my spring, your well goes dry within 6 months, maybe less. Victor's face went very still. The resort you're building, Elias continued. The $40 million you've got invested? It all depends on water that's flowing through my land first. You don't need my spring as a supplement. You need it as your primary source. And you've been lying about it from the start. For a long moment, Victor didn't say anything. Then he picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. You're smarter than you look, Victor said finally. I get that a lot. Victor set the cup down. So what do you want? You came here for a reason. I want the truth. How bad is it? Victor stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the desert. My well's been dropping for 8 months, slowly at first, then faster. I brought in geologists, hydrologists, everyone I could find. They all said the same thing. There's an upstream source pulling water away. I just didn't know where until your spring erupted. So when you tried to buy my land, I was trying to control the source before you figured out what you had. Yes. And the easement? The bulldozers? Intimidation. I thought if I made your life hard enough, you'd sell and leave. I didn't count on you being too stubborn to know when you're beat. Elias almost smiled. So what now? Victor turned to face him. Now we're both stuck. You've got the water, but no infrastructure and no money. I've got the infrastructure and the money, but no reliable water source. We need each other. I don't need you. Yes, you do. Because right now all you've got is a hole in the ground and a wild horse. You can't drink 40 acres of water, Elias. You can't sell it, can't transport it, can't do anything with it except watch it evaporate. But I can. I've got the permits, the equipment, the legal framework to turn that spring into something valuable. Valuable to you, valuable to both of us. Victor sat down again, and his tone shifted, less polished, more direct. Look, I'm not a good person. I know that. I've screwed people over to get where I am, but I'm not stupid. You've got leverage now, real leverage, and I'm willing to negotiate in good faith if you are. Elias studied him. What kind of negotiation? Partnership. 50-50 ownership of the water rights. We file a joint claim, share the infrastructure costs, split the profits from any commercial use. The resort gets priority access, but you get a guaranteed percentage of the revenue. Forever. And if I say no, then we both lose. I'll tie you up in court for years, and even if you win, you'll be broke and dead before you see a dime. And my resort will fail because I can't guarantee water to my investors. Nobody wins. Elias leaned back in his chair. I want it in writing, every detail, and I want an independent lawyer to review it before I sign anything. Done. I'll cover the lawyer's fees, and I want control over how much water gets drawn. We set limits, and if your resort exceeds them, the deal's off. Victor hesitated. That's not non-negotiable, Elias said. You want this partnership? That's the price. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, you get final say on extraction limits. But we set them together based on geological data, no arbitrary restrictions. Fair enough. They shook hands. Victor's grip was firm, professional. Elias's hands were still calloused and rough, and he didn't try to hide it. One more thing, Elias said. The horse stays. Whatever infrastructure you build, it doesn't interfere with Ridge's access to the water. Victor raised an eyebrow. The horse gets a clause in the contract? The horse gets a clause in the contract. Fine. Anything else? Elias thought about it. Yeah, you apologize. Victor blinked. Excuse me? You tried to destroy me, tried to take everything I had. Before we're partners, I need to hear you say you're sorry. Victor's expression went through several shifts. Surprise, irritation, something that might have been respect. Then he sighed. I'm sorry, he said. I underestimated you, and I tried to crush you instead of working with you. That was wrong. It wasn't eloquent. It probably wasn't even entirely sincere, but it was something. All right, Elias said. Let's get this done. The paperwork took 2 weeks. Victor's lawyers drew up a contract that was 40 pages long and full of clauses Elias didn't understand. The independent lawyer Victor hired, a woman named Catherine Ruiz who specialized in water rights, spent 3 days going through it line by line with Elias, explaining every section. This is actually a good deal, Catherine said, sitting across from Elias at a coffee shop in Ember Creek. Better than I expected. You're getting full partnership rights, revenue sharing, and veto power over extraction rates. That's rare. What's the catch? The catch is you're locked in. If you want out, you have to buy Victor out at market value. And given what this water's worth, that could be millions you don't have. So I'm stuck with him. Unless he violates the contract, then you can dissolve the partnership and keep the water rights. But that's a high bar to clear. Elias signed the contract on a Tuesday morning at the county office, with Patty as the witness. Victor signed next to him, and just like that, they were partners. Congratulations, Victor said, offering his hand again. You just became a very wealthy man. I'll believe it when I see it, Elias said. The infrastructure work started a week later. Victor brought in a crew of 12 engineer, contractors, heavy equipment operators. They drilled a proper well casing around the spring to prevent contamination, installed a pump system to regulate flow, and ran a pipeline to a storage tank they built on the high ground. The whole operation took 6 weeks and cost, according to Victor, just over $300,000. Elias watched it all happen, half convinced it was a dream. Ridge watched too, wary of the strangers but tolerating their presence as long as they didn't get too close. By mid-October, the system was operational. Water flowed from the spring into the storage tank, which fed both the resort's main line and a separate line running back to Elias's land. Victor had kept his word. Ridge's access to the water was protected, a natural pool left open at the spring site where the horse could drink freely. The resort opened in November, 6 months behind schedule, but finally functional. Elias didn't attend the grand opening, but he saw the photos in the local paper. Wealthy tourists, infinity pools, spa treatments, all of it powered by water that flowed through his land first. The first revenue check arrived in December. Elias stared at it for a full minute, not quite believing the number. $12,000. His share of the first month's water fees. He deposited it at the bank in Ember Creek, where the teller looked at him like he'd robbed someone. "This is real?" she asked. "Apparently," Elias said. He used the money to pay off his debts first, the hospital bills, the overdue rent, the credit he owed Dale Hutchins. Then he bought supplies: lumber, fencing, feed. He hired Roy to help him build a small cabin on the Devil's Anvil, something sturdier than sleeping in his truck. The cabin took 2 months to finish. It wasn't fancy. One room, a wood stove, a bunk bed Elias found at a yard sale, but it was his. He moved out of the rental in Ember Creek on a cold February morning, packing everything he owned into the truck bed. It wasn't much. Ridge was waiting for him when he pulled up to the new cabin, standing near the spring like he'd been expecting this all along. "What do you think?" Elias asked, climbing out of the truck. Ridge snorted and walked over to inspect the structure, sniffing at the door frame. "Yeah, I know it's not much," Elias said, "but it's ours." That night, he lay in the bunk bed and listened to the sound of water flowing outside. It was steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. For the first time since Margaret died, Elias slept through the night without waking. The checks kept coming. $12,000 in January, $15,000 in February, $18,000 in March as the resort hit peak season. Elias started putting money aside, not sure what for, just knowing he should. In April, a truck showed up at the Devil's Anvil, a livestock trailer with 3 horses inside. The driver was a woman in her 50s, weathered and tired-looking. "You Elias Crow?" she asked. "Yeah. I'm Sarah Needham. I run a rescue out near Fallon. Heard you had land and water. These 3 are bound for slaughter if I can't find placement. Thought maybe you'd take them." Elias looked at the horses. 2 mares and a gelding, all of them thin and scarred. Rescue cases. "I don't know anything about running a rescue," Elias said. "You don't have to. Just give them a place to live. I'll cover the vet bills and feed costs for the first 6 months. After that, if you want to keep them, we'll figure something out." Elias looked at Ridge, who was watching the trailer with interest. Then he looked at the 3 horses, who stared back with wary, hopeful eyes. "All right," Elias said. "Let's get them unloaded." By summer, he had 9 horses. Word had spread somehow, maybe through Sarah, maybe through the small network of rescues that operated in the rural counties. People started showing up with animals they couldn't keep, couldn't afford, couldn't save. Elias took them all. He built more fencing with the revenue money, expanded the grazing area, put up a 3-sided shelter for shade. Roy helped when he could, and even Dale Hutchins sold him feed at cost, though he grumbled about it. Ridge seemed to understand what was happening. He'd greet each new horse, nose to nose, like he was welcoming them home. The basin that had been a graveyard was now full of life. Horses drinking from the spring, grazing in patches of grass that had started growing near the water, resting in the shade. In August, Victor showed up unannounced. Elias was mending a fence when the black SUV pulled up. Victor got out, dressed more casually than usual, jeans, a polo shirt, sunglasses. "Didn't expect to see you out here," Elias said, not stopping his work. "Just wanted to check on the infrastructure. Make sure everything's running smoothly." "It's fine." Victor walked over to the spring, looking at the pool where Ridge and 2 of the mares were drinking. "You've turned this into a sanctuary." "Didn't plan it, just happened." The resort guests have been asking about it. They can see the horses from the hiking trails. Some of them want to know if they can visit. Elias straightened up, hammer in hand. "This isn't a petting zoo." "I know, but think about it. Controlled visits, small groups, educational focus. You could charge for it. Add another revenue stream." "I'm not interested in turning this into a tourist attraction." Victor held up his hands. "Your call." "I'm just saying, you've built something here. People notice." He left after that, and Elias went back to mending the fence. But the conversation stuck with him. That night, he sat outside the cabin with Ridge lying nearby, looking at the horses scattered across the basin. The moon was full, turning everything silver. The desert had always been harsh, but here, in this one spot, it felt almost gentle. He thought about what Victor had said, about what he'd built. It wasn't much. A cabin, some fences, a handful of broken horses. But it was more than he'd had 6 months ago, more than he'd thought he'd ever have again. In September, Sarah Needham showed up with a proposal. She wanted to partner with Elias to turn the Devil's Anvil into an official rescue sanctuary. She'd handle the logistics, the fundraising, the legal paperwork. He'd provide the land and the water. "What do I get out of it?" Elias asked. "A tax write-off, for one, and help. I've got volunteers, connections, resources. You're doing this alone right now, and that's not sustainable. Let me help." Elias thought about it for 2 days. Then he said yes. By October, the Devil's Anvil Equine Sanctuary was officially registered as a nonprofit. Sarah brought in volunteers to help with daily care, a vet who donated services, and a farrier who worked at cost. The operation grew slowly but steadily. The resort continued to thrive, and Elias's revenue share grew with it. He didn't spend much, just what he needed for the horses and basic living expenses. The rest went into a savings account that he checked once a month, still half convinced the numbers were a mistake. In November, almost a year after the spring had erupted, Victor called him. "We need to talk," Victor said, "in person." They met at the same coffee shop where Elias had reviewed the contract with Catherine. Victor looked tired, older than Elias remembered. "What's wrong?" Elias asked. "Nothing's wrong. Actually, things are good. Too good." Victor pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "The resort's exceeding projections. We're booked solid through next year. And I've got investors asking about expansion." "What kind of expansion?" "A second phase, more cabins, a bigger spa, maybe even a conference center. But it would require more water, a lot more." Elias opened the folder. Inside were architectural drawings, financial projections, and a water usage estimate that made his stomach drop. "This is triple what we're using now," Elias said. "I know, and I know we agreed on limits, that's why I'm here. I'm asking if you'd consider renegotiating the contract." Elias closed the folder. "No. Elias, we set those limits for a reason. To protect the aquifer. You want to triple the draw, you'll drain it dry in 5 years. Maybe less. The hydrologists say, I don't care what the hydrologists say. The answer's no." Victor leaned back, frustration flickering across his face. "You're leaving money on the table. A lot of money. I've got enough money. Do you? Because last I checked, you're running a nonprofit on a shoestring budget. You could expand the sanctuary, help more horses, do more good, but not if you're stuck in this scarcity mindset." Elias met his eyes. "This isn't about scarcity. It's about knowing when enough is enough. You build that second phase, and in 10 years there won't be any water left for anyone. Not for your resort, not for my horses, not for the people who live here. I'm not letting that happen." Victor was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up the folder and stood. "I respect your position," he said, "even if I don't agree with it. That's all I'm asking for." Victor left, and Elias sat there with his coffee, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. He'd just turned down what was probably millions of dollars. Margaret would have called him crazy. Maybe he was. But when he drove back to the Devil's Anvil and saw the horses grazing peacefully by the spring, he knew he'd made the right choice. Winter came, and with it a cold snap that froze the shallow edges of the spring pool. Elias spent his days breaking ice so the horses could drink, hauling hay, fixing frozen pipes. It was hard work, harder than anything he'd done in years, but his body was adjusting. He was stronger now than he'd been a year ago, leaner, tougher. Ridge stayed close during the cold months, like he was keeping watch. The other horses deferred to him, following his lead, trusting his judgment. He'd become the herd's anchor, the same way he'd become Elias's. In January, the sanctuary took in its 15th horse, a young mare who'd been abandoned at a foreclosure sale. She was terrified of people, wouldn't let anyone near her. But Ridge walked up to her on the first day, calm and steady, and within an hour she was grazing beside him like she'd always been there. Elias watched from the cabin porch, feeling something close to pride. "You're a better man than I am," he said to Ridge. The horse flicked an ear but didn't look up. In February, a reporter from a Reno newspaper showed up, asking to do a story on the sanctuary. Elias almost said no, but Sarah convinced him it would help with donations. The article ran in March with photos of the horses and a long interview with Elias. It painted him as some kind of folk hero, the old man who'd turned a worthless patch of desert into a haven for forgotten animals. Elias hated it, but the donations started coming in. Small checks mostly, but they added up. By April, the sanctuary had enough funding to hire a part-time manager, a young woman named Kelsey, who'd worked at a rescue in Colorado. She took over the day-to-day operations, freeing up Elias to focus on the harder cases, the horses too traumatized or sick for casual volunteers to handle. He was good at it, he realized. Patient, calm. Maybe it was the years with Margaret, who'd needed that same patience at the end. Or maybe it was just age wearing down the sharp edges. In May, Victor called again. "I've got a problem," Victor said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "The county's pushing for a regional water management plan. They want all major users, agricultural, commercial, residential, to register and cap their usage. If it passes, it could override our private contract." Elias felt his chest tighten. "Can they do that? Legally?" "Maybe. It's untested. But if they force us into a regional cap, we'd both lose control. They'd decide how much water we each get, and there's no guarantee it would be fair." "What do you want from me?" "I want us to present a united front, show the county that we've already got a sustainable system in place, prove that private management works better than government oversight." Elias thought about it. "When's the hearing?" 2 weeks? "I'll be there." The hearing was held at the county courthouse in Ember Creek, a stuffy room packed with ranchers, developers, and activists. Elias sat in the back, feeling out of place in his cleanest shirt and the bolo tie he'd worn to Margaret's funeral. Victor was at the front, flanked by lawyers. The county commissioner, a stern woman named Patricia Morales, laid out the proposal. A regional cap on water extraction, enforced by county inspectors, with penalties for overuse. "The goal is sustainability," Commissioner Morales said. "Too many private interests are draining our aquifers without accountability. This plan ensures that future generations have access to water." A rancher stood up, red-faced. "You're going to tell me how much water I can use on my own land? That's government overreach." "It's resource management," Morales shot back, and it's necessary." The arguments went back and forth for an hour. Then Victor stood up. "Commissioner, if I may," Victor said, "I'd like to present an alternative model." He gestured to Elias, who reluctantly stood and walked to the front of the room. Victor handed him a microphone. "This is Elias Crow," Victor said. "He and I co-manage a spring that feeds both his sanctuary and my resort. We've been doing it privately, with strict limits and regular monitoring for over a year. And it's working." Elias cleared his throat. "We set extraction limits based on geological data. We monitor the aquifer levels every month, and we've got a binding contract that either of us can enforce if the other violates the terms. No government oversight needed." Commissioner Morales looked skeptical. "And what happens when one of you wants to expand, when profit motives override conservation?" "Then the contract breaks and we end up in court," Elias said. "But so far we've both stuck to the agreement, because we know if we don't, we both lose." Another commissioner, younger, leaned forward. "This is an interesting case study, but it's one example. How do we scale that across the entire county?" "You don't," Victor said. "You let private landowners manage their own resources, and you step in only when they fail. Innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around." The hearing went on for another 2 hours, but Elias could tell the tide was shifting. By the end, Commissioner Morales agreed to table the regional cap proposal and instead create a voluntary registry for private water management systems. It wasn't a total victory, but it was enough. Outside the courthouse, Victor shook Elias's hand. "We make a good team." "Don't get used to it," Elias said, but he was smiling when he said it. By summer, the sanctuary had 23 horses. The Devil's Anvil, once barren and lifeless, was now green in patches where the spring water spread. Grass grew. Wildflowers bloomed. Birds nested in the rocks. Elias turned 73 in July. He didn't celebrate, but Sarah brought a cake to the sanctuary and the volunteers sang. Ridge ate half the cake before anyone could stop him. That night, Elias sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun set over the desert. Ridge was lying nearby, dozing. The other horses were scattered across the basin, grazing peacefully. He thought about the past year, about how close he'd come to losing everything, about how one dying horse had changed the trajectory of his entire life. "We did all right," Elias said to Ridge. The horse opened one eye, looked at him, then went back to sleep. Elias leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, listening to the sound of water flowing through the desert night. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September, 2 years after the spring had first erupted. Elias was out checking the fence line when his phone rang, the same ancient flip model that barely held a charge. He almost didn't answer. "Elias, it's Catherine Ruiz." The lawyer. Elias felt his stomach drop. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Actually, I have news. Good news, I think. Victor Hale is selling the resort." Elias stopped walking. "He's what?" "Selling. The whole operation. He's got a buyer lined up, a hospitality group out of Denver. They're offering $80 million. Why?" "Health reasons, apparently. His doctor found something during a routine checkup. He's not dying, but he's not young either. Wants to retire while he can still enjoy it." Elias sat down on a rock, trying to process. "What does that mean for the water contract?" "That's why I'm calling. The contract transfers with the sale. Whoever buys the resort becomes your new partner, and they might have very different ideas about how to manage things." "Can they change the terms?" "Not without your approval. The contract's ironclad on that. But they can make your life difficult if they want to. Push boundaries, lawyer up, find loopholes." Elias closed his eyes. "When's the sale go through?" 60 days? Maybe less." He thanked her and hung up. Ridge was grazing nearby, and Elias walked over, resting a hand on the horse's neck. "Just when things were settling down," he said. Ridge kept eating. Victor called that evening, his voice strained in a way Elias had never heard before. "I assume Catherine told you," Victor said. "Yeah. I want you to know, I fought to keep you in the loop. The buyers wanted to renegotiate the water contract as part of the purchase, and I told them it wasn't negotiable. You're locked in, same terms, no changes. I appreciate that. But Elias, these people are corporate. They don't think like you and me. They'll honor the contract because they have to, but they'll also squeeze every advantage they can find. Watch your back." "I always do." There was a pause. Then Victor said, "For what it's worth, working with you wasn't what I expected. I thought you'd be a pain in the ass." "I was." Victor laughed, short and rough. "Yeah, you were. But you were also honest. That's rare in my world." "Good luck with whatever comes next," Elias said. "You too." The sale closed in November. The new owners, a company called Summit Hospitality Partners, sent a representative to meet with Elias 2 weeks later. The man's name was Derek Lansing, mid-30s, suit that probably cost more than Elias made in 6 months. He showed up in a rented Lexus and looked around the sanctuary like he'd landed on Mars. "Mr. Crow," Derek said, extending a hand. "Thanks for meeting with me." Elias shook it. "Not like I had much choice." Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I wanted to introduce myself and assure you that Summit intends to honor all existing agreements. Your partnership with the resort will continue exactly as it has been." "Good to hear." "That said, we are exploring opportunities to optimize water usage. Nothing that would violate the contract, of course. Just looking for efficiencies." Elias crossed his arms. "What kind of efficiencies?" "Well, for example, the current extraction rate is capped at 12,000 gallons per day. But according to our hydrologist, the aquifer could sustainably support 15,000. That's 3,000 gallons we're leaving on the table. The cap's there for a reason, to protect the long-term health of the water source." "I understand. But if the science says we can safely increase it, why not? You'd get a proportional increase in revenue. Win-win. Because science isn't always right, and when you're dealing with an aquifer in the desert, you don't gamble." Derek's smile thinned. "I respect your caution. Let's table that discussion for now. I'm sure we'll find common ground as we get to know each other." He left shortly after, and Elias stood there watching the Lexus disappear down the dirt road. "This is going to be a problem," he said to Ridge. The horse snorted in agreement. Over the next few months, Derek made regular visits, always polite, always professional, always pushing. He wanted to renegotiate the extraction cap. He wanted to add meters to the spring to track usage in real time. He wanted to bring in his own hydrologist to reassess the aquifer. Elias said no to everything. By March, the requests had turned into demands. Derek showed up with a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman who laid out a proposal that would increase the cap by 20% in exchange for upgrading the pumping infrastructure at Summit's expense. "This is a generous offer, Mr. Crow," the lawyer said. "You'd be getting state-of-the-art equipment and a revenue bump, all at no cost to you. And you'd be pulling more water than the aquifer can handle long-term," Elias countered. "Our data says otherwise." "Your data's wrong," the lawyer bristled. "Mr. Crow, with all due respect, you're not a hydrologist. You're basing your position on gut feeling, not science. I'm basing it on 2 years of watching that spring every single day. I know how it flows, how it responds to heat, how the levels drop in summer and rise in winter. Your data's looking at averages. I'm looking at reality." Derek leaned forward. "Elias, we're trying to work with you here, but if you keep stonewalling, we'll have to explore other options." "Like what?" "Like legal recourse. The contract gives you veto power over extraction rates, but it also requires you to act in good faith. If we can prove you're being unreasonable, then take me to court," Elias interrupted. "I've been there before. I'll go again." The meeting ended badly. Derek and his lawyer left, and Elias knew it wasn't over. He called Catherine that night. "They're going to sue me, aren't they?" Elias said. "Probably, but they'll have a hard time proving bad faith. You've got 2 years of sustainable management on your side. That's not nothing. What if they win? Then a judge could override your veto and set the extraction rate themselves. But that's a long shot. More likely, they'll try to make you miserable until you cave." "I don't cave," Catherine laughed. "Yeah, I've noticed." The lawsuit was filed in April. Summit Hospitality Partners versus Elias Crow, alleging breach of contract and requesting judicial intervention to set a new extraction cap. The legal fees started piling up immediately. Catherine worked on contingency, but there were still costs: court filings, expert witnesses, depositions. Elias used his savings to cover it, watching the account he'd built over 2 years drain away month by month. Sarah offered to help, and the sanctuary started a fundraising campaign. Donations came in, small checks from people who'd read about the case in the local paper, larger ones from environmental groups who saw it as a David versus Goliath fight. It helped, but it wasn't enough. By June, Elias was broke again. The hearing was scheduled for August, and Catherine estimated they needed another $20,000 to make it through trial. "I don't have it," Elias told her. "Then we need to settle." "I'm not settling." "Elias, you can't win a trial you can't afford to fight." "I'll figure something out." He sat on the porch that night, staring at the spring. Ridge was lying nearby, and the other horses were scattered across the basin. 29 of them now, all rescues, all depending on this water. He thought about giving up. Thought about calling Derek and accepting whatever terms they'd offer. It would be easier, smarter, probably. But then he thought about the way Ridge had pawed at that rock 2 years ago, refusing to quit even when everything looked hopeless. And he knew he couldn't walk away. The next morning, he drove into Ember Creek and stopped at every business on Main Street. The diner, the hardware store, the bar, even Dale Hutchins' feed shop. He told them what was happening, what was at stake, and asked for help. Most said no. A few said maybe. Dale surprised him. "How much you need?" Dale asked. 20,000. "Maybe more." Dale whistled. "That's a lot of money, Elias." "I know. I'm not asking for charity. I'll pay it back. Every cent." Dale looked at him for a long time. Then he pulled out a checkbook and wrote a check for $5,000. "Consider it an investment," Dale said. "You lose that spring, this whole town loses. The resort brought jobs, sure, but it also brought water pressure. Literally. If Summit drains that aquifer dry, we're all going to feel it." Elias took the check, hands shaking. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just win." Other checks followed. Small ones, mostly. 100 here, 50 there. The owner of the diner contributed 200. The bartender gave 50. Even Roy chipped in 1,000, claiming he had it lying around from a side job. By the end of the week, Elias had 12,000. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The fundraising campaign hit social media, and suddenly people from outside Ember Creek were paying attention. A wildlife advocacy group in California donated 10,000. An environmental blogger with a big following wrote a piece about the case, and donations spiked. By mid-July, Elias had enough to make it to trial. The hearing started on a Tuesday in August, held in the county courthouse. The room was packed. Locals, reporters, activists, Summit's legal team. Derek sat in the front row, looking confident. Summit's lawyer went first, laying out their case. They brought in hydrologists who testified that the aquifer could support higher extraction rates. They showed charts, graphs, computer models, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. Elias was being unreasonable. Catherine cross-examined hard, poking holes in the data, questioning the assumptions. But Summit's experts were good, and their arguments were polished. Then it was Elias's turn. Catherine called him to the stand, and he sat there in his one good shirt, feeling out of place. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Crow," Catherine said, "can you explain why you've refused to increase the extraction cap?" Elias took a breath. "Because I've been watching that spring for 2 years, every day, and I've seen how it changes. In summer, the flow drops. Not a lot, but enough to notice. In winter, it comes back. That tells me we're riding close to the edge. If we push it harder, we might not see the drop until it's too late." Summit's experts say the aquifer can handle more. What makes you think you know better? "I don't know better, I just know different. They're looking at numbers. I'm looking at the water." Summit's lawyer objected, calling it anecdotal evidence. Judge Chen overruled. Catherine continued, "What happens if the extraction rate is increased and you're right? Then the spring dies, and with it, everything that depends on it, the sanctuary, the resort, the aquifer that feeds the whole region. Once it's gone, it's gone." "And if you're wrong?" Elias met her eyes. "Then I cost Summit some money, but they'll survive. The spring might not." Summit's lawyer took over on cross-examination, trying to paint Elias as a stubborn old man clinging to outdated ideas. Elias didn't fight it. He just answered the questions, steady and calm, the same way he'd handled everything else. The trial lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, Judge Chen issued her ruling. She sided with Elias. The courtroom erupted, cheers from the back, groans from Summit's side. Judge Chen banged her gavel, calling for order. "The contract is clear," she said. "Mr. Crow has final say over extraction rates, and the evidence does not support a finding of bad faith. His management has been cautious, yes, but caution is not unreasonable when dealing with a finite resource. Summit's motion is denied." Derek looked like he'd been punched. His lawyer started to object, but Judge Chen cut her off. "This matter is closed. Court adjourned." Outside, reporters swarmed Elias, but Catherine steered him away. Sarah was waiting with the truck, and they drove back to the sanctuary in silence. When they pulled up, Ridge was waiting near the gate. Elias got out and walked over, and the horse pressed his forehead against Elias's chest. "We did it," Elias said quietly. Ridge exhaled, warm and steady. The victory didn't end the fight. Summit filed an appeal, which was denied. Then they tried to renegotiate, offering more money, better terms, anything to get Elias to budge. He refused every time. By the following spring, Summit gave up. Derek stopped calling. The resort continued operating under the original contract terms, and the water kept flowing. Elias turned 75 that July. The sanctuary now had 34 horses, and Sarah had hired a full-time staff of 3. The Devil's Anvil had gone from worthless land to a functioning nonprofit, pulling in enough donations to cover operating costs. Elias still lived in the small cabin, still spent his days mending fences and hauling feed. His hands were more gnarled now, his back stiffer, but he kept going. One afternoon in September, he got a call from Victor. It had been over a year since they'd spoken. "Elias, it's Victor. Didn't think I'd hear from you again." "Yeah, well, I wanted to check in, see how you're holding up." "I'm fine. Sanctuary's doing good. Water's still flowing. I heard about the trial. Congratulations." "Thanks." There was a pause. Then Victor said, "I was wrong about you. Back when we first met, I thought you were just another obstacle, someone to get around. But you taught me something." "What's that?" "That some things are worth more than money. I spent 40 years chasing deals, building projects, making profits, and I've got nothing to show for it except a bank account and a bad heart. You've got a sanctuary full of horses and a piece of land that actually matters. I think you won." Elias didn't know what to say to that. "Anyway," Victor continued, "I'm moving to Oregon, buying a cabin near the coast. Gonna spend whatever time I've got left watching the ocean. Thought you should know." "Take care of yourself, Victor." "You too, Elias." They hung up, and Elias sat there for a while thinking about the strange path that had brought them together. Two men who should have been enemies, ending up as something close to friends. In October, a film crew showed up at the sanctuary. They were making a documentary about water rights in the West, and someone had told them about Elias's story. He almost said no, but Sarah convinced him it would help with fundraising. The crew spent a week filming, shots of the horses, interviews with Elias, footage of the spring. The director, a young woman named Maya, asked him questions he didn't know how to answer. "What would you say to someone who's facing an impossible situation?" Maya asked. Elias thought about it. "I'd say it's only impossible until it's not. I thought I was done 2 years ago, broke, alone, waiting to die. Then I found Ridge, and he showed me something. That you don't quit just because the odds are bad. You keep going because that's all you can do." "Do you think you would have survived without the horse?" "No, but I also don't think Ridge would have survived without me. We saved each other. That's how it works sometimes. You don't make it alone." The documentary aired the following spring on a regional PBS station. It was 30 minutes long, mostly footage of the sanctuary and interviews with Elias, Sarah, and some of the volunteers. The response was bigger than anyone expected. Donations flooded in. People from across the country reached out, asking to visit, to volunteer, to help. By summer, the sanctuary had a waiting list of horses that needed placement. Sarah hired more staff, built more shelters, expanded the grazing area. The Devil's Anvil was thriving in a way Elias had never imagined. He was sitting on the porch one evening in late June when a truck pulled up, beat-up Ford, older than his. A man got out, maybe 60, with a weathered face and tired eyes. "You Elias Crow?" the man asked. "Yeah, I'm Tom Harding. I've got a horse. Gelding, about 8 years old. Rescued him from a kill pen 3 months ago, but I can't keep him. Heard you might have space." Elias walked over to the trailer. The horse inside was thin, scarred, with a long gash across his shoulder that was healing badly. "What's his story?" Elias asked. "Don't know much. Previous owner ran a trail riding outfit, went bankrupt. This guy ended up at auction. Nobody wanted him." Elias looked at the horse, who stared back with wary eyes. He saw himself in that look. Saw Ridge 2 years ago, dying in the dirt, waiting for someone to care. "All right," Elias said. "Let's get him unloaded." Tom helped him settle the gelding into a pen, and Ridge came over to inspect the new arrival. The two horses touched noses, and the gelding relaxed slightly. "He'll be all right here," Tom said. "They all are," Elias replied. By the time Elias turned 76, the sanctuary had 52 horses. It was more than he'd ever planned for, more than he could manage alone. But he wasn't alone. Sarah ran the operations. Kelsey handled the day-to-day care. Volunteers came and went, drawn by the story, the mission, the horses. Elias spent most of his time with the hard cases. The horses too broken or too scared for anyone else to handle. He had a patience for it now, a calmness he hadn't possessed when he was younger. Age had sanded down the rough edges, left him with something quieter. Ridge was slowing down too. He still moved well, still led the herd, but there was a stiffness in his gait that hadn't been there before. Elias knew what it meant. They were both running out of time. One morning in early autumn, Elias woke to find Ridge lying near the spring, breathing hard. He rushed over, dropping to his knees beside the horse. "Hey," Elias said, running a hand down Ridge's neck. "What's going on?" Ridge's eyes were clear, focused on Elias. There was no panic, no fear, just a quiet awareness. Elias called the vet, a woman named Dr. Martinez who'd been volunteering at the sanctuary for over a year. She arrived within the hour, examined Ridge, and pulled Elias aside. "It's colic," she said. "Severe. I can try surgery, but at his age, the odds aren't good. And even if he survives, the recovery's brutal." "What's the alternative?" Dr. Martinez didn't answer right away. Then she said, "We make him comfortable. Let him go on his own terms." Elias looked at Ridge, who was watching them from where he lay. "How long?" "Could be hours, could be a day. There's no way to know." Elias nodded. "Do what you can to keep him comfortable, but no surgery. He's earned the right to choose." Dr. Martinez gave Ridge a sedative to ease the pain, and Elias sat down beside the horse. Sarah came by, and Kelsey, and some of the volunteers. They all said their goodbyes, quiet and tearful. When they left, it was just Elias and Ridge, alone by the spring. You remember when I found you? Elias said, his voice rough. You were dying. I didn't think you'd make it through the night. But you did. You fought. And you taught me how to fight, too. Ridge's breathing was slower now, labored but steady. I don't know if there's anything after this, Elias continued. Margaret used to talk about it, about seeing people again on the other side. I never believed her. But if she's right, and you see her, tell her I'm doing okay. Tell her I didn't give up. Ridge's eye rolled toward him, and for a moment, Elias saw the same fierce determination that had carried them through those first impossible weeks. Thank you, Elias whispered, for everything. Ridge took one more breath, deep and slow. Then he let it out. And he was gone. Elias sat there for a long time, one hand resting on Ridge's neck, feeling the warmth fade. The other horses had gathered at a distance, watching in silence, like they understood. When the sun started to set, Elias finally stood. His legs were stiff, his back screaming, but he didn't care. Sarah helped him bury Ridge the next day, near the spring where the horse had first found the water. They dug the grave by hand, Elias insisting on doing most of the work despite his age. When it was done, they laid Ridge to rest and covered him with earth. Elias stood over the grave for a long time, hat in his hands. Rest easy, he said. The sanctuary continued without Ridge, but it felt different, quieter. The other horses adjusted, a young mare named Willow stepping into the leadership role. But Elias felt the absence like a missing limb. He kept working, kept showing up every day, but the fire had dimmed. He was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Sarah noticed. You need to take a break, she said one afternoon. I'm fine. You're not. You've been running on empty for months. Let Kelsey and me handle things for a while. Go somewhere. Rest. I don't need rest. I need to be here. Elias, Sarah's voice was firm. You've given everything to this place, but you're no good to anyone if you burn out. Take a week. Go to the coast. Visit a friend. Do something that's not this. Elias looked at her, saw the genuine concern in her eyes, and realized she was right. He took a week off in November, his first real break in 3 years. He drove to the coast, stayed in a cheap motel, and spent his days walking along the beach. The ocean was cold and gray, nothing like the desert, but it was peaceful. On the last day, he sat on a bench overlooking the water and thought about everything that had happened. The land, the spring, the horses, Ridge. All of it felt like someone else's life. But it was his. He'd built it, fought for it, kept it alive when everyone said it was impossible, and he wasn't done yet. When he got back to the sanctuary, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, but something close. A quiet determination. The years that followed were gentler. Elias scaled back his hours, letting the staff handle more of the daily operations. He focused on the horses that needed him most, the ones too damaged for anyone else. The sanctuary kept growing. By the time Elias turned 80, they had 70 horses and a full-time staff of 8. The documentary had aired again on a national network, bringing in more donations, more volunteers, more support. Victor sent a postcard from Oregon. Just a picture of the coastline and a single sentence. Still watching the ocean, still glad I met you. Elias pinned it to the wall of his cabin. In the spring of his 81st year, Elias started having chest pains. Dr. Martinez insisted he see a specialist, who ran tests and delivered the news Elias had been expecting. Your heart's worn out, the doctor said. You've got maybe a year, maybe less. There are treatments, but at your age, they're not going to buy you much time. What if I don't do the treatments? Then you've got 6 months. Maybe. Elias thought about it. I'll take the 6 months. He told Sarah, who cried. He told Kelsey, and the rest of the staff, who looked at him like he was already gone. He told the horses, who didn't understand but stayed close anyway. He spent his remaining time doing what he'd always done, mending fences, hauling feed, sitting by the spring and watching the water flow. On a warm day in October, 8 months after the diagnosis, Elias woke up feeling different, lighter, like something had shifted. He got dressed, walked outside, and sat down on the porch. The sun was just coming up, turning the desert gold. The horses were grazing peacefully. The spring was flowing, steady and strong. Sarah found him an hour later, still sitting there, hat in his lap, eyes closed. He looked peaceful. They buried him next to Ridge, near the spring. The whole town showed up, people who'd known him, People who'd heard his story, people who just wanted to pay their respects. Sarah gave a short eulogy, talking about stubbornness and courage, and the way one man had turned a graveyard into a sanctuary. The Devil's Anvil continued without him. Sarah took over as director, Kelsey as operations manager. The sanctuary kept growing, kept saving horses, kept thriving, and the spring kept flowing. Years later, a new volunteer asked Sarah about the two graves near the water. Who's buried there? Sarah looked at the simple markers, one for Ridge, one for Elias. That's the man who started all this, she said, and the horse that saved him. What was he like? Sarah thought about it. Stubborn. Impossible. The kind of person who'd fight a losing battle just because it was the right thing to do. She smiled. And he won, not because he was strong or smart or lucky, but because he refused to quit. The volunteer looked at the graves, then at the sanctuary, the horses, the water, the green growing in the middle of the desert. He did all this? No, Sarah said. The horse did most of it. Elias just listened. She walked away, leaving the volunteer alone with the graves and the sound of water flowing through the Nevada desert, turning death into life, one drop at a time. The land that had been worthless was now priceless. The man who'd been forgotten was now remembered, and the horse who'd been left to die had become the foundation of something that would outlive them all. Because that's the thing about second chances. They don't come when you expect them. They come when you're at the end, when you've got nothing left to lose, when the only choice is to fight or fade. And sometimes, if you're stubborn enough, if you refuse to let go, if you trust the instincts of a dying horse in the middle of nowhere, you find something worth living for. Not a fortune, not fame, not even happiness, really. Just a piece of land, a spring that won't quit, and the knowledge that you made something matter. That's enough. It was enough for Elias. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for.